The cameras loved his smile. Behind it lived a man in hiding. For 60 years, Cesar Romero danced across stages, lit up silver screens, and became one of old Hollywood's most graceful sophisticates. Yet beneath the impeccable suits, the pencil mustache, and that legendary charm, the image promised everything the life itself withheld. How does a man of extraordinary talent spend 7 decades as everyone's favorite escort, everyone's sidekick, everyone's charming foil, but never the lead, never the lover, never quite himself? The untold story isn't about the white grease paint and green hair. It's about what the Joker's laugh concealed. From the roaring 20s through the digital age, Cesar Romero embodied a paradox: the man who could romance Marlene Dietrich and Joan Crawford on screen, yet guard his truest self with the precision of a locked vault. He conquered Hollywood's studio system as a Latin lover, charmed the Rat Pack, and seized immortality as television's most iconic villain, all while living on his own elaborate terms. This is the story of ambition, identity, artistry, and the extraordinary price of performance when the role you play becomes the only world allowed to see you. Cesar Julio Romero Jr. entered the world on February 15, 1907, in Manhattan. Born to Cuban immigrant parents who carried the weight of old-world expectation into the new. His father, Cesar Sr., emigrated from Barcelona in 1888 to establish himself as an import-export merchant, a man of commerce and propriety. His mother, Maria Mantilla, was a moderately successful concert singer and pianist who spoke of lineage with quiet pride. She was reportedly the biological daughter of José Martí, the legendary Cuban patriot and poet. The household hummed with music, refinement, and the unspoken understanding that the Romero name carried responsibility. Young Cesar grew up in Bradley Beach, New Jersey, a world away from the tenements his parents had escaped. He moved through prep schools and expensive education, groomed for a life of respectable ambition. His parents had built a sugar import business. Wealth seemed assured, the future certain. Then came October 1929, and the world fractured. The stock market crashed like a guillotine. His father's fortune evaporated. The family's financial security dissolved into anxiety. At 20 years old, facing the prospect of an education he could no longer afford, Cesar made a choice that would reshape his destiny. He became a ballroom dancer. The young man possessed an asset far more valuable than inherited money. He possessed beauty, grace, and an almost supernatural ability to charm. In New York's glittering nightclubs, at venues like the St. Regis Roof, the Ambassador Roof, and the Montmartre Café, he learned to lead and to captivate. His dancing partner, a man named Higgins, faded into obscurity, but Romero bloomed. Nightclub patrons, theater producers, and society women noticed him. The nickname emerged early, Butch, a joke among Hollywood insiders that teased the gap between the man and his image, a nickname that would follow him through every triumph and hollow victory of his long career. In 1927, Cesar stepped onto a Broadway stage for the first time in the production of Lady Do. The footlights recognized what his family had always seen. He had star quality, but Broadway was a cramped stage for his ambitions. By 1933, at 26, he made his film debut in a forgettable picture called The Shadow Laughs. The industry barely noticed. What changed was the narrative the studios built around him. His dark eyes, his olive complexion, his elegant bearing. These marked him as the Latin lover, a category that studios could market, control, and monetize. It was a box, and Cesar stepped into it because stepping in meant work, meant survival, meant the promise of rebuilding what his family had lost. The roles came quickly. In 1935, he appeared opposite Marlene Dietrich in The Devil is a Woman, positioned as the romantic other, the charming distraction, never the chosen one. Studios at 20th Century Fox recognized his value and bound him to long-term contracts. He danced and romanced with Shirley Temple in Wee Willie Winkie, 1937, and The Little Princess, 1939. He appeared in musicals with Betty Grable, in comedies, in swashbucklers. Always the sidekick, always the villain or the foil, always the man who did not get the girl. By his own later admission, he rarely played a true leading man, and when the credits rolled, the heroine belonged to someone else. Yet the real artistry emerged in something else entirely. Romero possessed an almost supernatural gift for making audiences love him, while playing men they should have despised. He could be the blackguard, the fortune hunter, the rogue, and somehow convince viewers that he deserved their affection. This was not luck. It was craft. He studied human nature with the precision of a jeweler studying diamonds. He understood rhythm, timing, and the invisible architecture of charm. He learned to lead men across dance floors and women across emotional terrain. His roles as Cisco Kid in a string of low-budget westerns showed that he could anchor a narrative, that he possessed sufficient magnetism to carry a story. Yet Hollywood's gatekeepers kept offering him the same typecast: the Latin lover, the ornamental other, the man in the background. What complicated matters, what made the whole apparatus of his career a kind of elaborate performance, was what no one in the mainstream press was permitted to speak about openly. Cesar Romero was a gay man in an era when that truth was not survivable in Hollywood. The studio system, the gossip columnists, the industry machinery, all of it depended on elaborate lies. The publicists needed a story that explained why he never married, why he was always photographed with starlets on his arm, why he remained unbothered by the romantic rejection that plagued his characters on screen. So they built one. They positioned him as America's most reliable, most elegant, most available bachelor, a man who could charm any woman, court any starlet, yet somehow remained mysteriously content with solitude. In reality, Cesar managed his life and his identity with the discipline of a covert operative. He became the perfect companion for women in the public eye who needed a respectable escort. Joan Crawford relied on him. So did Ann Sheridan. Marlene Dietrich counted him as a friend and confidant. To these women, Cesar offered something rare: a man who could be seen with them without triggering the gossip about romance or marriage. A sophisticated companion who asked nothing in return except pleasant company. His impeccable manners, his elegant dress, his unfailing grace, these were not affectations. They were survival strategies. They were the armor of a man who had to be perfect because one mistake, one rumor, one photograph misinterpreted could destroy everything. The cost of this performance accumulated in ways that rarely surfaced in interviews. He lived most of his adult life with members of his extended family, his mother, his siblings, their children, all under the same roof, in a domestic arrangement that kept him tethered to propriety and observation. He could not risk being alone with another man, not in a way that might be questioned. He could not afford emotional honesty or romantic visibility. He could not, in any meaningful way, live as himself. Every party, every premiere, every social photograph was choreography. The role consumed his life even as it enabled it, even as it granted him the wealth and fame that let him support his family and secure his future. In 1942, as World War II consumed the nation, Cesar enlisted in the United States Coast Guard, serving aboard the USS Cavalier in the Pacific Theater. It was an act of patriotic duty, yes, but it was also an escape, a chance to step away from the suffocating machinery of Hollywood, to inhabit a world organized by different rules and hierarchies. The war, for all its horrors, offered a strange kind of freedom, a permission to exist outside the studio system, to be among men without performing, to be useful in ways that had nothing to do with his face or his charm. He returned from military service to an industry that had barely shifted during his absence. The roles continued, the typecast persisted, and the accumulation of small frustrations calcified into a philosophy. As Romero would later reflect on his own career, "I was more of a character actor than a straight leading man. There were very few pictures where I ended up with the girl. It was a philosophical acceptance, the kind of resignation that comes only after decades of watching others claim the prizes he was never supposed to receive. But something else was happening too, a shift in what audiences wanted. The old studio system was cracking, television was rising, and the rules were changing in ways no one quite predicted. The role that would become his most famous began almost casually. In 1966, ABC was developing a new television series called Batman, and producers were assembling a gallery of colorful villains for the show's campy, pop art aesthetic. The Joker was being designed by artist Dick Giordano, a white-faced, grinning anarchist in purple suit and green hair. The studio executives were looking for an actor who could embody chaos while maintaining an underlying dignity. An actor who could make villainy entertaining without losing the thread of intelligence underneath. Cesar Romero was summoned to a meeting. While waiting, he happened to glimpse the conceptual artwork for the Joker's costume spread across a table. According to the account, Romero felt the absurdity of what he was seeing, the grotesque makeup, the theatrical madness, and spontaneously burst into a loud, manic, playful laughter. A producer overheard that laughter and recognized immediately that it was the sound they needed. "That's it," the producer reportedly said. "That's your Joker's laugh." There was a twist. Romero refused to shave his trademark mustache for the role. He had worn that thin, elegant pencil mustache for decades. It was part of his identity, part of his armor, part of the persona he had built and maintained. Producers protested. Romero held firm. So the makeup artists applied the white clown makeup directly over the mustache. And viewers, watching those 1966-1968 episodes, could see if they looked closely, a faint, dark line beneath the grease paint. The actor's own face, refusing to be entirely erased, asserting itself even within the costume. The role became a phenomenon. The Joker's high-pitched cackle, his pun-laden dialogue, his elaborate schemes, these became iconic. TV Guide would later rank the character among the 60 nastiest villains in television history. Subsequent actors, Jack Nicholson, Heath Ledger, Joaquin Phoenix, would cite Romero's interpretation as the template they studied and subverted. He had not gotten the girl, but he had gotten something else: immortality. The role that came closest to capturing his actual self, the mask, the persona, the elaborately constructed artifice, became his legacy. The irony was exquisite and melancholy in equal measure. For 60 years, Cesar Romero had been forced to perform heterosexuality, to court women publicly while guarding his true self, to maintain the elaborate fiction that made his career possible. Then, at 59 years old, he was finally given permission to play a character defined entirely by performance, by artifice, by the gap between appearance and reality. The Joker was a man who wore a mask so complete that his true face became unknowable. It was, perhaps, the truest role Cesar Romero ever played. After Batman ended, Romero remained remarkably active. He guest-starred on 77 Sunset Strip, Zorro, and Rawhide. In the 1970s, he joined the cast of the NBC comedy Chico and the Man, playing a gruff father figure opposite the young comedian Freddie Prinze. He appeared on Fantasy Island and Murder, She Wrote. In the 1980s and early 1990s, he maintained a recurring role on the primetime soap Falcon Crest, playing a Greek billionaire. Television wanted him. Hollywood still recognized his value. He remained engaged with his craft, never quite able to walk away from the cameras, the applause, the illusion of connection that performance provided. What changed, subtly but fundamentally, was how he could exist in public. As attitudes shifted and the culture began, hesitantly, incompletely, to accommodate more diverse ways of being, Cesar Romero never explicitly came out. He maintained his discretion, his politeness, his adherence to the code he had internalized decades earlier. No longer performed heterosexual romance quite so eagerly. He appeared less often as the romantic foil, the available bachelor, the charming suitor. He slowed down. He aged beautifully. He spent more time with his family. He retreated gradually from the machinery that had required such extraordinary effort to maintain. In 1990, at 83 years old, Cesar Romero stepped away from acting. He had given nearly 65 years to the craft, from his first Broadway appearance in 1927, through bit parts and dancing roles, through the golden age of Hollywood, through the transformation of television into America's primary storytelling medium. He had acted in over 100 films. He had graced dozens of television shows. He had mastered the art of making people love him while keeping them at a calculated distance. He spent his final years hosting classic music programs on cable television, a fitting coda for a man whose life had always been performed to an invisible audience. He lived comfortably, wealthy from his canny deal-making during his most productive years, particularly the profit-sharing arrangement he had negotiated for the television serial Passport to Danger, 1954, which had paid dividends throughout his life. Financial anxiety, at least, was no longer a companion. On January 1, 1994, Cesar Romero died at St. John's Hospital in Los Angeles. He was 86 years old. The cause was official and clinical: complications from pneumonia and bronchitis, compounded by a blood clot. He died as he had lived, with dignity and with limited fanfare. The obituaries ran respectfully. His peers offered tributes. Dorothy Lamour, who had worked with him, said, "He was so congenial. There wasn't a phony bone in his body." Anne Jeffries added, "He was elegant and eloquent. His manners, his dress were impeccable. He was the last of an era." These testimonials contained a kind of accidental truth. There were no phony bones in his body, only a performance so complete, so integrated into his being, that phony and real had become indistinguishable. He was elegant and eloquent precisely because the role demanded it. He was the last of an era, not because eras end, but because the particular machinery of enforced secrecy, of carefully constructed lies, of complicity between press and studios and audiences, could not survive into a new world, a world he did not live to see fully emerge. The role that people remember, the Joker, that white-faced, green-haired embodiment of controlled chaos, was in many ways his most honest work. Because the Joker, beneath all the laughter and the pranks and the theatrical mayhem, was fundamentally alone. The Joker performed for an audience that could never truly know him. The Joker wore a mask so complete that the man underneath became a secret, even to himself. And the Joker, like Cesar Romero, was a genius at making everyone around him love and laugh while never quite letting them see what was real. His story matters now not as a scandal to be exposed, but as a mirror. It reminds us that for generations, talented people, artists, creators, human beings of real value, spent their lives managing elaborate deceptions, not because they chose to, but because the world demanded it as the price of visibility. It reminds us that the photographs and the performances and the public personas are not lies exactly, but they are not truths either. They are survival strategies. They are art forms. They are the extraordinary, ordinary tragedy of being seen without being known. The mustache remained visible beneath the white grease paint. The actor asserted himself even within the costume. That small rebellion, that insistence on not being entirely erased, on leaving a trace of his true self visible even within the manufactured image, might be the most honest thing Cesar Romero ever offered the world. It was a moment of visibility within a lifetime of performance. It was a faint mark that said, "I was here. This mask is mine." And underneath, there is a man who existed, who was real, who mattered.